regular meeting of the Operations Planning Committee to order for January 31st, 2019. First, just a public service announcement for anybody watching this morning. It's super cold outside if you haven't yet been out, so please take appropriate precautions. Public health officials are cautioning that you can get frostbite in a very short amount of time, and it's also important to remember the impact of cold on your pets. So just be mindful of that. I think it's going to be short-lived, a day or two, and then I think we're back into some fairly normal winter weather for the weekend. But with that, I think we'll start here with our schools. Tara.
Good morning, everybody. We, as you all know, are well underway into our budget. So that's what the board has had a preeminent focus on at the moment. We would like to say thank you to the Selectmen, to the Board of Finance, and to the RTM for their support in our off-cycle appropriation for electrical panels at the 3 schools. We appreciate how quickly everyone mobilized to get that done, and we think it will be of real benefit, and we look forward to having that complete hopefully by June if everything stays on track. So we appreciate everyone for their support and getting their groups together to deliberate on that. We've had some discussion at the state level, and I know, Jim, you've been watching the proposed bills as well. Certainly the Board of Education proposed bills as they stand are not supportive of what we're hearing and or need information to really understand what's being proposed about regionalization of schools. So we will, follow that closely, and if we get any updates, we will let you know, and certainly if the town gets any updates that we think would be useful, they can pass along. That would be appreciated. It's really where we are right now.
Great, thank you. Morning, John. Okay, I'll go to my left. Seth, good morning.
Good morning. Lovely day. It's clear. It's nice and freezing. Monday night, the RTM met and had a series of briefings on the status of different projects going on in town. I thought it was great. Sort of like a follow-through on things that we passed and work that we've done. And also we got a briefing from the economic development directors from Stamford and Norwalk about what's going on in their town. We're kind of like the jelly and the peanut butter in between the sandwich. So it's kind of nice to have a picture of what's going on around us. Pending activity is the bag ordinance. We have 3 committees of the representative town meeting that are working on it. Public Works is leading it, and Mac Patrick and Monica McNally, Matt Patrick from Health and Safety, and then Frank Kemp, he's head of TGS&A, and they ultimately will be writing the final resolution that will come before the representative town meeting. So there'll be a public hearing coming up. I think it's
The 6th at 8 p.m.
The 6th at 8 p.m. in the auditorium, and it's fact-finding. It's really a check by the 3 committees working on this to see if there are any ideas that they missed or any thoughts that they hadn't heard, and that will then set the stage to bring a final resolution, put that together, and then come before the RTM. So,
okay. Just a question for you. I thought that Ed and Jill did a great job in front of the RTM the other night. Certainly, always good to hear all the things that are going on and then get completed, right?
well, as you're driving by
Yeah.
through these towns, you see things going on, and you say, "I wonder what that's all about." Well, these folks have a pretty good handle on it.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed meeting the new economic development person for Norwalk, and Tom is always very chock full of information for Stanford. If they come again, one small request on my part is if they could talk about how the work that they're doing relates to the town of Darien. Because it certainly does. There's impacts, and just would like to know if they're thinking about the surrounding communities in any way as they're making their development plans.
Right,
That would
well,
be helpful.
it seemed these briefings seem to be well received, so I would think that, and coming right after the state of the town, it's kind of nice to get the other, the sort of a picture of what's going on around us. So I would imagine we'll try to continue to do that. They seem to like to do it, so.
Sure. Okay.
Thanks.
Sure. Since
guess-
John's here, we'll.
Yeah.
go
I guess
ahead.
my question is, why would they though? Like, as planning and zoning, I'm not looking out to Stanford and Norwalk asking them what the Corbin district's impact is gonna be. I mean, in some way, we're fighting for the same consumer, right? Same restaurant goers and that sort of thing.
Well, we were very important to them when they were putting together their proposal for Amazon. I can tell you that.
Okay.
They wanted all kinds of information. They wanted videos on the work that we're doing at the Darien High School.
Nice.
So there's no question that regional economic development is important to all of us. A lot of it's driven by our cities, and I'm sure that we play, a role in that as they're courting businesses to come. Where do their workers and executives want to live? Send their kids to school. So I do think it's important. Not that they overtly say, "Hey, gosh, how can this impact the town of Darien?" But there's clearly an interplay.
Cool, thanks, appreciate that, that's a good thought. I don't really have much, other than we had our hearing on Highland Farm, and one thing I want to just make clear, and I think we've discussed in the past, but publicly I want to say this, is that the town has an approved site plan, and we understand it's got to go through a budgeting process. I guess my plea is, if the budgeting process doesn't go the town's way, i.e. if the project isn't fully funded, that the town is prepared then to come back to planning and zoning and fully amend that plan. Because remember, the approved site plan is based on a lot of assumptions, number of parking spots relative to the amount of activities expected there. So if there's going to be I don't want to say permanent change, but a lasting change based on the budgeting, that the town come back, and that's what we would ask of any applicant. So I think that's basically all the new information. Our workload has fallen off a cliff. I'm happy we are getting meetings done with, I think it's maybe more normalized than we've had over at least my tenure, which is now 5.25 years. A lot of the big projects are behind us. Ironically, I ran into David and Rocky Genovese at NEAT on my way into this meeting. That's why I was a few minutes late. Maybe you can cover the hearing at
Sure.
DOT, but it sounds like that went really well relative to Corbin development and pedestrian safety. So, again, I wasn't there, but one of the things that they wanted to pass along was a coordination between town leadership and the local traffic authority, and how well it came together yesterday in their eyes. And so I'll let you take it from there. But really excited that the thoughtfulness over the last decade plus around all the planning for downtown continues to gain momentum. And a meeting that I was told was that expectations were really low in the success in terms of positive traffic developments and positive pedestrian developments. Actually, again, this is secondhand, but Jamie was there. Came out very favorable for the applicant, so pretty excited about that.
Yep, I won't leave you hanging on that. It was a great meeting. Anytime you go into that big DOT building up in Newington with 40 people in a room, it reminds you of bureaucracy at its best. But it was a great meeting. It was very well thought out. They have their standards, their parameters in terms of, not to go too much into the weeds, but required lane widths and edge lines and various things that this development will have to adhere to. But there's a bit of latitude because our corridor is not really consistent throughout the corridor. It doesn't actually match with all of the CONDOT regulations. But the reason
it actually precedes conduct.
Yes,
our
it does,
corridor.
yes.
Right, a couple hundred years.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
George Washington.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. The king's time.
Yeah.
The reason why I went up was for pedestrian safety, to talk about pedestrian safety enhancements. Changes to the alignment of the intersection between the Boston Post Road and Corbin Drive. It's a little bit irregular right now if you really study it. The Baywater Corbin development is going to square up that intersection, which will reduce the length of the crosswalks, which will provide a safer condition. There'll be new signaling, new signal timing, pedestrian crossing amenities. But the big one for us was what we have all been referring to as a new mid-block crosswalk. And John, I don't know if there's going to be a new driveway into the Corbin development, essentially where the small driveway exists today by Helen Ainson.
Into the shoe repair.
Into the shoe repair. So that's going to be a driveway, but it's going to be sort of a drive-through because you'll be able to enter off the post road and then exit ultimately onto Corbin Drive.
It, for all intents and purposes, even though it's going to be privately managed and
Right.
maintained, it's going to, a regular layman would consider it a public road,
It's
public access.
a road, but it's not public.
Yeah, one way.
Yeah. It's a road, but it's not public, and that's important because as a private driveway, as DOT considers it, as Baywater I think wants it to be so that it can be in their control, that area on the post road can't be considered an intersection. It's a turn into a driveway, which then makes the pedestrian crossing considered a mid-block crosswalk. But DOT seems very satisfied with the proposal that Corbin put forward with the kind of pedestrian safety amenities associated with that crossing that they're very favorable on it. We thought they were going to deny that. Now, we don't have,
It's not a
Baywater
done
doesn't
deal
have the
yet.
approval yet, but it went shockingly smooth yesterday. So I think that's really a win-win for the people of Darien.
And it sets a nice precedent because Jamie and I have discussed down by Day Street or think of down by the Sugar Bowl. And again, this is something David and I discussed right preceding this meeting. But years ago, they had actually laid out plans, the DOT, and actually put markings of a crosswalk there. And we're going back 8 to 10 years ago. And that never came to fruition for whatever reason. But hopefully the success of this mid-block walk will then, maybe work its way down to another mid-block, which is desperately needed.
Yes.
But,
We talked
So-
about that with Captain Anderson yesterday.
yeah, so again, positive momentum. It's crazy that we're getting so excited about a crosswalk, but I think we've all dealt with it for so many years
Yes.
of weaving mid-blocks, even seeing moms and children in hand. It'd be great if we could get 1 or 2 extras along the way. So
I made sure to mention that. I said, people who take their life in their hands regularly.
Yeah.
The important thing maybe for you to just make a mental note, John, is that any of those mid-block crosswalks precludes you from having on-street parking within 25 feet in either direction. So it's a little bit more of a challenge at Day Street, but
Yeah.
not impossible.
let me see. And then we have a couple improvement projects coming down the pipe of town assets. I failed to mention at the last meeting, I think I followed up with an email, but just publicly. Any of these improvement projects, the town-owned assets have to be consistent with the town plan, meaning we have to have a mandatory referral hearing. So as you get closer to plan, and we're getting really close, I believe, to Diller property for the path that's going to be constructed. I've had discussions with Jeremy. The path within the high school's property will not be significant enough of an improvement because it's really just over existing open space, so we won't have to do a mandatory referral on that. But I'm thinking down the lines of Pear Tree Point and Oxford School.
So we don't need it for the town portion of Diller either.
You will need it for the town portion.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
So I've asked Jeremy, as the plans come in for EPC, that once we have something to look at, we don't need a full application for a mandatory referral, but just a general plan. We'll bring that forth first. That's not a public hearing, that's just a general meeting item. Typically goes very smoothly, I say typically, in that, we make a decision that night. And then the formal application for the site plan improvement, or site plan amendments, that will be on the high school property and Diller property, regrading on the Diller property. That will all be part of a public hearing process.
So I had some questions on that,
Yeah.
we have referred people to you.
I haven't gotten it yet, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
you'll lighten your workload.
Exactly.
So just a process question
Sure.
for me. So on some of these longer lead time issues like Ox Ridge and
Yep.
Pear Tree, not a problem, an application for a mandatory referral can be submitted anytime. But for the Diller project, if we're looking to really sort of move that forward,
Yep.
is there any reason why a mandatory referral application can't come with the full zoning application?
So, since my involvement in P&Z,
Yep.
I've been an advocate of separating the two, so there's no confusion between what each process is. Mandatory referral is just our commission making a judgment
Right.
whether or not a project is
Right.
consistent with the town plan, conservation
Yep.
development. The one instance where we had a little friction there was actually Highland Farm,
Yep.
where you came forth, and it was under my direction to come forth with a mandatory referral, but we didn't have any sort of plans. So a couple of our commission members said, well, how can we approve this when we don't know what the plans are?
Right.
So it's
I
I want to keep it separate so it's not the same evening, but it's within a few weeks of the application. So that's why I say, once this running path comes forth to EPC, there's going to be engineering plans and such. We'll take a quick review of the plans and say, hey, is this improvement consistent with the town plan? That's what we'll ask ourselves. And then we have to cite certain areas of the town plan which it's consistent, or if it's inconsistent. I mean, one of the most famous rulings by P&Z of its inconsistency was the lights, back in, I guess, 2006 or something like that. And so, there at times, the commission has said some improvements aren't consistent. But-
Sure.
So we just want enough information to make that ruling of consistency, but of course, the public hearing process is much more detailed.
Okay.
Does that clarify?
Yeah,
Pretty good?
I always
Yeah.
like to think about process
Yeah.
efficiencies when it comes to, things that not just the town, but things that impact our residents and our businesses. How can we move things through the process?
Yeah, and ironically, Highland Farm, we went through the whole site plan approval first, and then did the mandatory referral.
Right.
But again, that was because a couple of my commission members didn't have enough information to originally rule. So, I've tried to figure out how much information is enough for the commission to make a ruling on a mandatory referral. So
Okay.
that's why I'm waiting for the EPC application, because I think once that information's out there, they'll have enough information to rule.
Okay.
So I think just on process, because
Yeah.
there's been some confusion with the portion of this project that was proposed for the high school.
Sure.
And I do think the papers tried to clear it up. The Board of Education has not approved the project, so they still need to circle back.
Sure.
Part of it is we were unable to approve without all the other governmental approvals. So just for anyone, there was some confusion among people whether the board had approved the project or not approved the project. The board approved that the DF could move forward with the
Perfect.
contemplated gift.
Yeah.
Presuming all of its appropriate governmental approvals would come back to the board for final delivery.
And I think that's a great way to do it, because in the same, they need permission to go forth,
From PNC
well,
from FARA.
Yeah.
from the town. And I, in a similar manner, when I was working with the DGFL for just using temporary lights at each facility, we had to go and get permission to apply from both the Board of Ed for the high school when we use temporary lights, and the town from Houlihan Field. So I get the process, and I think that's awesome. Like, it's the right process. Ask for permission to go through with the application, go through the right processes on a land use approval and a gifting approval, and then come back for the final approval.
So I have gotten some heads up, and I will get it to both of you, and you can disseminate. I've gone through old files, kind of searching Diller property, how it relates to the school. There is something about a rain garden that exists closer onto Diller to help mitigate flooding beneath it, and the state required.
Man-made?
I'm sorry?
Man-made?
Man-made, it had to be put in. So I've asked everyone to cull it. I think those records were from like 2009. I found it in a spot search, so I'm not entirely sure that I have all the details, but I did ask everyone to cull that information, and I'll get it to both of you.
Yeah,
Kind of for what it's worth. as you
Send it
consider
to, if you wouldn't mind, just send it to Jeremy, because it's gonna be probably more important for EPC than
Sure.
P and Z.
There is a water course that runs through Diller pretty close to the circle, the asphalted circle.
Yeah.
Oh, I
So
mean,
we had some drainage problems with it a number of years ago.
Oh, there's plenty of wetlands
Yeah.
through it. I mean, but if you look through Woodland Park or
Sure.
No,
you
that's
know,
fine. I just want us all to have the same information.
Yeah.
It surprised me
Yeah.
when it popped up for me, so I'd rather share it and everyone knows
Yeah.
where it is and what it is.
Yeah, no. This wasn't. I saw some comments that the property's filled with wetlands. How can we use it? Well, we use ample parklands that have wetlands through it. So we're gonna listen. The design's gonna be
Yeah.
have to be very sensitive to wetlands and non-impactful to wetlands. That's what EPC is gonna go through, and that's what our regrading is gonna ensure if we were
Yeah.
to approve it. So this is not just like plowing a let's call it a bulldozer track through with reckless abandon. I mean, this is gonna be a well thought out plan if it's ultimately approved.
Well, Parks and Rec has looked at it
Yeah.
extensively for a variety of different things, so we have a lot of that information too, but whatever you have, thank you for forwarding that.
So
Yes,
the
I-
time, I
sorry.
was gonna, go ahead.
The value of the gift?
300,000 we were told.
And then also, it's gotta go through, I believe, local traffic authority, because there is some sort of parallel parking that's been proposed.
But I also believe it might at that, Kate, if this is where you're headed, at that level, the gift might need to go to the RTM.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
Just,
it
you
has
know, it's a
lots
longer
of
process,
process
I think,
steps.
yeah, lots of process.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we've been through this gifting process. I think the first time was the Fields, where the town and everybody, and this is not blaming blame, it was one of the first times we've gone through all this, is, you know, we've been through this gifting process now through multiple times, so I think each time it's getting smoother and smoother. So, I'm told it's gonna come our way sometime in April.
Okay.
EPC sometime in late March. So typically the process is EPC has to get started before P and Z gets started, so we have their input when our process starts. So we'll have full insight to the wetlands impacts and that sort of thing.
Before we let you off the hook today, John, can you give us a brief update? What do you know about Palmer's and Federal Realty?
Nothing more than I said last time. Yeah, and I think I am told that we should expect by the summer Federal and Palmer's some movement in terms of progress. These large projects, as we just discussed with the Corbin District, which is now known as, have a lot of steps beyond just the approval process. And these are complex projects. And there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work that goes on between the building department, I think the fire commissioner, just all the details and the staging. We talked about one of the projects and the worries. Actually, it was Old Town Hall Homes and the worries on the impact of the paramedics too. I mean, there's a lot of things that they try to, that staff works on diligently, well beyond our involvement. So I think when you look at the complexities of these projects, and I'm not even talking about from a private side getting the funding and their efforts aligned, how long these take. So I am telling people, and it's again something I discussed with Mr. Genovese this morning, this town's going to be disrupted for 3 to 4 years, and I think people are going to, trying to set the expectations really low. And it's in multiple areas of town, Old Town Hall Homes,
We got the road.
Corbin District,
And the
and
train
then,
station.
and the Heights is said. So let's, these are great changes. I haven't been this excited in a long while. I mean, in regards to the changes that are coming down our way in town, and relative to what is happening throughout the rest of the state, I think it's just even more amazing. But we're going to be disrupted for a good 3 to 4 years. So it's not going to be pretty. Hopefully, I'm confident that the disruption will be more visual than impactful, but it's something we're going to have to deal with.
Not dissimilar to the new high school. It was 3.5 years.
Yeah.
From approval December 4th, 2001
It's a good point, yeah.
to opening in September 2005.
Yeah, and that, I think, is what's, because of its location, maybe a little easier than some of these,
Right.
right? Because you're not in the midst of
Right.
everything. I
But
mean,
you still had that
yeah.
drop
Oh,
off
my
every
goodness, yeah,
morning.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when I first got to town, so I missed that.
All right, thanks for that.
I think that's it.
Yeah, okay. Great. Do you have to go?
No, I'm actually
Okay,
home today.
okay, great. So we'll go here, Frank.
Well, I don't have very much. Obviously, the budget process is underway. I've caught a little bit of your sessions. I feel like I need to kind of get them all in before the next Board of Finance meeting so we can organize a little bit what extra we need to do. I think we also want to finish up on the debt and credit card policies at that next meeting. We've been kind of procrastinating on those.
Why?
I don't
I
know.
mean, it's either yes or no.
No, I mean, the credit card policies are very difficult.
There's something I don't understand.
Yeah. There's like with the credit card policy, you know, do you charge each user? Do you not charge each
Yeah.
user?
Yeah.
What level do you set it at? It's pretty,
And how does it impact the various departments that allow for
you
credit?
know, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and there are different views.
That's
Yeah.
procrastinating rather than it's a longer discussion. Procrastinating referred
Because
to.
they didn't want to do it. They wanted to deal with it.
They're being diligent.
Yes,
Oh, there
yes,
you go.
that's right.
But it should be an interesting spring, I think, really, and given some of the initiatives and the new change in Hartford, which we won't know very much about for a while, I think. But
That's true.
Oh, we know enough now to make everyone's head spin.
Along those lines, I guess if I may ask, when there's so many, is that a sigh?
I think it,
There's a little bit of a sigh, sorry.
There's
Not you, not you.
There's an audible sigh. Don't worry, I do it all the time. I guess from a town planning standpoint and a budgeting standpoint, I'm looking at you, sir. How do we go forth with like an Oxbridge school? And I'm not saying we don't. Don't
Right.
suggest that's to the negative point, but how do we plan through this? Do we plan as if nothing's going to happen along these lines, or?
In the actual scheme of things, we have to budget for, and we have to authorize the full cost of Oxbridge. I think the question will be, if state funding, state support for construction projects is disappearing, will the taxpayers have the appetite to pay for all that, to understand that,
Right.
whatever number we throw out there, that is our share, we're paying the whole thing.
I was going a step further.
yeah.
But
Oh,
the
hold
other-
on.
the
John,
other thing-
I'm with you.
I'm like, what happens when we're merging with Stanford?
Well, we
No.
probably shouldn't go that crazy,
Yeah.
but I've coined a new acronym because I'm in government and I can do that. Looking at all of the potential bills, it would be foolish to not do some math in your mind about aggregate potential impact, API. That's my new thing. So, it changes from time to time, depends on whether you're talking about motor vehicle tax, losing all of it, some of it, 1 mil onto your real property tax that goes to the state, any changes that might be considered with ECS or excess cost. There's certainly discussions going on with the school finance project about how to fund special education. I haven't seen any specific bills yet. And then the host of other ideas for regionalism. So we should, in my opinion, continue with our process as we've always done it. We need Oxbridge Elementary School. We need to rebuild Oxbridge Elementary School.
Maybe Stanford will pay for it.
Only under one scenario. Frank.
Just kidding.
Well, but I have
I
to
don't think
say-
we should be laughing about that scenario.
No, but I have to say, and on this, I think at least in the beginning of the tenets that you're putting out, Jamie, I agree with you. There are lots of changes. We've weathered changes of governors before as a town. We've managed well. I think both compliments to the school side and the town side in doing that. And, to freeze an indecision when we have real need, and clearly we spoke about Oxbridge, but I would say on any development or any change, because we don't know what
Sure.
happened, would be foolhardy for Darien because we have managed well. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be cautious. It doesn't mean that when plans come forward, we should ask for analytics, as I know the town is so fond of. We should do all of that. But I think, to halt or to act like we still don't need to do what our community needs would be because of some presumed something would be bad. I agree, you need to do the math, you need to know what's coming down the pike, you need to know the scenarios, anything,
I changed the word from presumed to proposed.
Well, but
That's true.
I'm not
There are proposals,
presuming
that-
anything.
yeah.
And we
I'm not
have-
presuming anything. There's something
Right.
out there that would be hugely disruptive.
Right. Sure.
Not only to the education system, but
Right.
all the way we think about the
I
the
think
way
what
we
you said is the
budget for
greater economic
future.
development of Darien. So
Right.
yes, there are proposals on regionalization on schools. I happen to agree that if you needed to regionalize, I wouldn't start with schools. But if there are some chances to regionalize, and if it's going to be mandated, I would agree with the idea that we need to look and we need to see where we can do it and where it's efficiently and where we might choose to do it rather than being mandated. I would be against mandated, forced regionalization where the town has not had involvement or the schools have not had involvement.
So I think really it comes down to putting a heavier burden on all of us to really make the case, because people are aware. People, that's the great thing. People are very engaged in these proposals that are coming forward. They're very obvious in the media every day. There's talk about something new. Read that interesting one about microbreweries this morning.
Yeah.
Which is a bummer because I was hoping, John, you guys might approve one of those someday.
There's one right across the border that I have my eye on too.
Awesome.
We want things on this side of
Yeah.
the border.
Yeah.
So I think it puts a heavier burden on us to make the case to our taxpayers who, there's no question, they are feeling the anxiety of the uncertainty, which I feel like we've been living in that environment for a very long time.
This took it to a whole new level though.
Well, it did, but it was we kind of knew it was coming with the change of political makeup in Hartford and folks really trying to move forward. The idea of regionalism certainly isn't new, but there is no question that is the focus of the current leadership in Hartford in all realms of government service delivery. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, but I really want to give the floor to Terry. If you're done, are you finished?
Yeah,
Frank?
fine.
Okay. Because, boots on the ground in Hartford.
Boots on the ground. Thank you. Couple of things. First, Governor Lamont will be giving his budget speech on Wednesday, February 20th. It will be televised. You are all welcome to come up if you want to come up. One piece of it came out the other day, which would be a proposed tax on groceries, which that has everyone deeper concerned.
2%.
Say that again?
2%.
2%. But again, that's reportedly what's coming out. CBIA, which is Connecticut Business and Industry Associates, they send out newsletters and they represent all the businesses in the state, and their research and reporting is quite good. This came yesterday in the mail. Growth must be the top priority. And it gives a graph of all 6 New England states and the job growth. Post-recession jobs recovery in New England, and I've reported about this almost every meeting, that Connecticut is still the only state in the country that has not fully regained all the jobs lost after 2008. And these statistics bear it out too. At least we've risen to 93% of jobs regained, but the US average is 240% jobs regained. Massachusetts is 397% jobs regained since the recession. So what business leaders are telling us is they don't want mandates, they don't want new taxes, they don't want regionalism, they don't see the need, they don't see the rational logic for these proposals. Yet what comes out this year, and all of these have been Democratic proposals, teacher pensions to the municipalities, regionalized schools, which certainly there's been tremendous discussion on that, without detail. It's just sort of thrown out there. And our legislative session is only another 4 months. So in 4 months, how do you possibly work through a subject as weighty and as needing of tremendous detail as regionalizing schools. It makes no sense. The schools that are smaller, I do understand the point about some of the school districts in particularly the eastern part of the state, their school enrollment is declining. And they perhaps might share a superintendent. That makes sense. They should be able to do that. But it should not be top down, everyone has to regionalize because a few school districts have have declining enrollment. And this is why I see the democratic way of approaching things in Hartford is this heavy top down, we know best, this is how government should operate. Whereas here locally, we can see how the grassroots up, I mean, our Board of Finance has historically been top performing. It's very thoughtful, it is nonpartisan in every sense. So it is what it is. We can only educate people and have them just email and be in touch with their state senator and state representative on these proposals and what they feel. Health departments regionalizing is another one on the table, and I think the numbers from last proposal was our health department is $295,000 a year. It's here in town hall. The proposal would have been, we would have paid $2.1 million, $2.5 million, and the office would be located somewhere to be determined. So again, these are proposals that are going to have a huge impact, not only on our wallet, but on delivery of services. And I can't buy into it. Another proposal that Senator Looney, who's the Democratic Senate President, didn't float, he filed this, is a 1 mil tax on all property. So in addition to our local property taxes, we would pay another mill. So it would be $1,000 on, I think it's about equals $1,000 on each $1 million for the property. In addition, that same bill would, all the car property tax, instead of going to each individual municipality, would go to the state for redistribution throughout the state.
Mhm.
So that's where your term of the aggregate potential impact comes in, because that's, if you take 1 mil and subtraction of our car property tax, it equals $12 million we would have to make up to maintain current services. And these are proposals, let's see the facts, let's see the data. I mean, I'm all for new ideas, but let's see why this makes sense. And you cannot do it in 4 months, I'm sorry. On the school teacher pension, that's something that came up, I think definitely last year. There's a logic to that. Teachers are employees of our town. However, it's again, we need to see a lot of data. There's a reason we went to this plan, I think 30 or 40 years ago. I don't see this happening. I don't think it's logical that this should happen in the next 4 months. It takes a tremendous amount of work, and I'm in opposition to that and all the other. I'm open to the discussion on that one, but I could not support it. I'm not supporting any of these. I think it's perilous, they're far-fetched, they're irrational, and they're desperate. The state is not in a good situation, and we continue to spend money. It's not right. We need to stop it.
So Terry, I'm sorry, you're open to the teacher pension coming down to
Discussion.
municipalities, just not in this session. You think it's too short?
Correct.
I think
But even then, it would have to be, there are huge caveats for me to support it.
they would have to give us control.
Correct, that's one of them. And the run-up would have to be
Sorry about
a
that.
very long run-up.
I got a sigh, you got a giggle.
I would have no problem with us taking responsibility for the teacher's pension if we got our share of the assets and we got control.
Correct.
Or I should say, the Board of Ed got control.
Mhm.
But, we control the investment decisions, we control the plan decisions.
The funding
But to just
decisions.
give them the money, and they still make all the decisions on how it's invested, what benefit levels to give, that's just ridiculous.
We'd be taking a significant liability on it.
Yeah, correct.
Yes,
Right.
but
But
we
you
have-
would get the funding mechanism too.
Right.
Yeah,
and we have thus
Yes
far.
and no. It's not like we would get the revenue stream.
no, that's what I'm saying.
No, we would have to.
If they
We would have to
give us.
create our own revenue stream.
Or you have to
Yes,
take
we
on the
would
liability
have
and
to
the
take on the
management.
contributions, which we don't pay now, yes.
So that, exactly the discussion that we've just had is why I don't support this right now, but I do support the discussion, because It's just, it's so nuanced and so detailed. You cannot get this done in 4 months. And to try and jerk into this is ridiculous.
So
Are
Terry,
they
is
looking
there
at
any?
all of their own issues?
No,
I mean, it feels to me
No.
like they're trying to solve all the state's problem by reducing the municipality's dependency on the state
right,
and not looking at the state's
spending,
problems.
right, no. And the unions continue to drive the debate and drive most of the Democratic legislators,
Well, I
which is
think,
wrong.
you know, I'll just interject here. I think that there's probably people on both sides of the aisle who understand fully the financial challenges that we're in, and everybody's looking for solutions. People just differ on how you attack the problems. And, you know, having a discussion about teacher pensions is important, but I have never heard in any forum that I've ever been in a conversation about a disillusionment of the teacher pension system as we know it today and devolving that to cities and towns. I have great confidence that were that to be the system that's proposed, the town of Darien would do an excellent job managing the pension for their teachers. You know, even a system where we begin, where new teachers that are hired go into a pension system that's managed by the town of Darien. I think that would actually be very attractive to help maybe recruit teachers, actually. But to pay somewhere between $4 and $13 million of our costs into a system for which we have zero control, under which the teacher pension system can issue pension obligation bonds that create tremendous liability in the future, is not something that I would support. There are other models I would support.
Right, well said.
Terry, is there anything in this session, given the state's fiscal situation is there anything in this session that you do see as a remedy?
We'd have to see what the governor's gonna say on the 20th. I mean, I had hope on his opening day speech. I thought his remarks were thoughtful. It's an opening day speech. He is surrounding himself with some people who understand economic principles. We'll have to see what he says on the 20th.
Thanks.
There's some,
But it's, I mean, the majority, we still have a Democratic majority, and they are,
A larger Democratic.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we have to go back to Jamie. I think there's people on both sides of the
Yeah.
aisle that understand fiscal management, and hopefully we
They
do.
don't
If we make it completely partisan, we won't get anything done.
Well,
So-
but they don't vote, when it comes down to it, the majority Democrats continue to support these efforts that increase costs in our state and totally refute this.
It is partisan. I mean, it's a supermajority voting
It
in
is.
a line, so
so
that's our only
yeah.
hope, is that supermajority sees the economic realities.
So you know, I'd like to bring it back because I believe in the way we do government here in Darien is very bipartisan, nonpartisan, as it should be. Terry, do you have other things to report?
No,
Okay, great. So there are some proposals that are worth further study. I sincerely hope that it's happening up in Hartford. The report from the Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth Committee had some very interesting proposals. I think we're beginning to see with the tax on groceries, whether it ends up as a tax on groceries or simply closing of sales tax exemption loopholes. I know that's something that's been put forward. There are some ideas that have been put forward from CCM in their report that's called This is Different. There are things in there. CCM, by the way, is very much operates in the way we do here in Darien.
Can you define that acronym for us?
Connecticut Conference of Municipalities. It's the state's largest municipal advocacy group, and we are 168 of the 169 towns. Everyone works together, and all of the things we vote on and put forward, including this report, This is Different, there's things in it that people like and people don't like, but we came to a bipartisan conclusion that we have to put something forward in order to move the dial. So I think that there are some platforms, bases for ideas on how we can begin to move the dial. But what I'm not hearing yet, and maybe it's just because they don't grab the headlines or they don't come out in the little dispatches from CCM or COST, Council of Small Towns, I haven't seen any spending reduction proposals. So I'm waiting to see those, because you can't talk about revenue enhancements and revenue sharing and wealth redistribution unless you have a similar earnest discussion about the size of state government.
So I have no budgetary control whatsoever from my perch as P&Z, but when does the town start thinking about cuts relative to what's going on in the board? It's kind of,
Every budget season, I think we.
yeah, but we haven't.
Well,
Yeah.
that,
But we
that's
have-
I think it might have already started.
Yeah. So no, that's a good question, and Frank probably can talk a bit about this from a Board of Finance perspective. In my mind, probably 4 years ago, we really began thinking about the town of Darien finding a path to self-sufficiency. You know, budgeting less, budgeting zero for ECS reimbursement. So we do think about it all the time, and then we certainly do I can't, you know, I don't follow the Board of Ed as closely, but Tara can comment on that. At the Board of Selectmen level, we're keenly aware of some of these outside influences that would impact our taxpayers' ability and willingness to pay. We're going to have those conversations when we talk about the police budget. They want to continue to fully civilianize their dispatch, adding more employees. We remember John's calculations on what it costs when you bring new employees on over the long haul. So, you know, that's one area of conversation where we're going to talk about doing an analysis on regionalizing dispatch. I hear it across the state. So before I can decide to hire 3 more employees, I need to know what my options are and if that's a savings to the taxpayers. So I think it pervades pretty much everything that we do.
Well, in fairness, John, I think the focus has been on kind of controlling growth.
Right.
In a context where I think people appreciate the attractiveness of the town is kind of key to the success of so
Yes.
there's a balance in there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do think every year we do a zero-based budgeting approach. And, you know, I think we have been, in terms of the school, our approach has been, we put in for what we need for, and that's been able us to keep any growth that we need to have at a very predictable level. Versus you look at towns maybe around us, some of their school budgets look great one year, and then are up to 5% the next year, and then they look great another year. And so what we've been able to do for the taxpayers, and I think from a planning perspective, is every year look at what we need and make sure that the growth, if it has to be there, is kind of off of fixed or contractual based costs so people can predict. You know, this year we have an over 3% increase in our contractual fees, and our budget's, you know, under 3%. So you're already finding efficiencies. No, we're not.
You're not
Through our
cutting.
budgeting, no, we are cutting. We're cutting, we have
Cutting or reducing
Or
the
reducing
increase?
your
we reduce increase and we do cut. So I mean, I think that what we try to do is, at least as we look at an overall economic plan, not have spikes. You know, a favorable dip one year just to spike it the next year, like we are watching some school towns do, isn't a great for the taxpayer. You can't kind of see a plan. You can't kind of see why things, if there has to be an increase, are there because they're part of this portion of a plan. And then we reduce where we can. And the other thing that is with schools, you'll find that then there becomes some major tenants. If you really want to, let's say, cut FTEs, you're talking about increasing class size.
Yep.
And that's a valid conversation given where you are fiscally, but then you have to decide, and the town needs to come out and decide where their values lie on that. And that's a fair, honest, open conversation that can be had. But I do think our approach has been really, if you look back, kind of actually fairly fiscally conservative in terms of its approach.
Yeah. No, I only raise that because I see this slow-moving tsunami working from north and east of us, a grand list impacts, real estate values.
Yes.
New
Yes.
Canaan's grand list is down 7%. Ours was flat,
Ours is slightly down.
slightly down, I'm sorry, slightly down.
Yeah.
But we're all in one market, and eventually there's a price that, we're gonna be competing with New Canaan real estate. And so maybe our timing of the reval was right, but we're
Yeah,
expecting.
it does make a
combine.
difference.
Yeah.
I think, we're not at a point, and we evaluate everything, the value to the taxpayers, and we haven't gotten to the point yet, where we have to cut programs. But I can see where there'll come a point where if we have to take on some of the obligations that we may as a result of the state, that we actually have to, look at what are the must-haves,
Yep.
what are the nice-to-haves, and, maybe one of the things we need to start doing is more resident outreach. What is important to you to continue?
I'd like
You
to
know,
do a
even
survey.
Probably a good idea, actually, at some point.
Yeah, I'd like to do a survey about that.
And I'm not saying it's this budget cycle, but look out a year, 2, 3, where we're gonna start to see big impacts.
Sure.
At least at this, the road that the
But,
current market's on.
Except that we're gonna see some big positive impacts in the next couple of years as those redevelopment projects come on.
Remember though, our grand list is driven, like 90% is residential, or a little, 75% is residential, I forgot. I had it in my state of the town, I forget that number.
Right, but it will be, we will see an improvement in the
Yeah.
grand list, but it's also, at that point, we'll have to be careful not to go hot wild.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, and it's something we didn't, like,
I don't
to
know
credit.
how dangerous.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's been a big consideration of improving a lot of these projects, has been the grand list consideration. Again, we're not financially deciding
Yeah.
these projects.
But it also, in increasing the grand list comes along with a cost, because those projects
Yeah.
have driven our need for, additional hires in the building department.
Yeah.
Which
P&Z.
are, P&Z.
Yeah.
The building department one should be, not permanent, but the fire marshal will have to be staffed up permanently because of these type of developments. I don't think
It's
that's
also increased enrollment.
But there are other things that we need to do with the police if we're going to have the police department that we really should have.
Correct.
Yeah, as Tara said, school enrollment, as much as we tried to design this to limit, or to target certain age demographics, it's definitely gonna have an impact as well, especially as the economics get more difficult in this
No, and
region
most
as well.
developments in town that have been approved, and we're happy to have them, have resulted in an
Yeah.
increase in our enrollments,
Sure.
which we're
Yeah,
happy to welcome those children,
Yeah.
but
We're
It's
very lucky.
possible.
I'm gonna run through a couple more things from my perspective. So I think we talked a little bit about the budget. We're in that process. We continue our deliberations Monday night. Our budget has virtually no program changes to it other than a new employee proposed in Parks and Rec, and a new employee, and these 3 civilian dispatchers to continue building a civilian dispatch model that was proposed by our former chief, Dwayne Lavello. So those are the things. We are at the point at the Board of Selectmen, which we've been saying for a few years, about talking about service delivery. What I will say that you don't see are efforts on the part of our departments to move more of our services online, use technology as a benefit so that we can, our employees can do more work versus hiring more employees by virtue of, the software tools that are available to us. So I think
The
that's.
train parking list is a perfect example. You get
Parking,
more-
moving our zoning permits online, which is just about to go live, which will
cool.
be great. We talked a little bit about Highland Farms, excited to get that going, parking's available, fences are up. John, to your point about Palmer and Federal, people should understand that those developments, and I pray every night that those are actually gonna happen, because there's a lot of work that the town is doing in collaboration with those future projects. Signal investments in traffic signals, investments in drainage, plans for building sidewalks on Edgerton. So, having the unknown about when and if is a challenge for many of us in town hall that are working hard on ancillary plans, I would say. And not the least of which is the Norotan Heights train station, the continued redevelopment of that. We just hired a consultant to do a feasibility study for us to rebuild the train station building and the pedestrian overpass and reorganize access and parking around the Norotan Heights train station. So very excited that that's moving forward, but there's no question that that's meant to work hand in hand with
Oh, I mean, the drain,
Comm or federal.
without federal, namely, the drainage improvements for that area of town don't happen. Because most of the improvements, I mean.
It would be our
it would be
contribution,
insignificant.
the town's contribution to drainage will be done anyway. It's
Yeah.
actually gonna happen this year.
Yeah. But it's
But
insignificant to the
it
total
won't make,
impact.
yes.
And people ask, well, why can't we do it without, well,
We
we're
don't own
locating a
property.
lot of the storage on private property. And that was part of the, just to review, that was part of the regulation change that became
Right.
more, before my time, that allowed the redevelopment. And one of the quid pro quos was, there had to be a drainage improvement for that area of town. And there's no other way, I mean,
Correct.
in a reasonable manner, that the town can execute any drainage improvements without the use of that property, because it sits at the bottom of the bowl.
Right,
So,
correct.
I
Which,
have no
which
comments.
remind, yeah, okay.
yeah, sorry.
Which reminds me of the, when you talk about school consolidations, we've been here before, right? The town of Darien has
Within
been here
itself,
before.
right.
People don't remember necessarily Hollow Tree Elementary School. and-
Sounds like Terry does.
And Baker,
Does too.
and Baker Elementary School, right? So, left to their own devices, when you need to figure out how to manage your town financially, you find ways to address that at the local level. There are more things that we can do though. And what I do want to say is that I'd like to see the state, Terry, enable municipalities, whatever that means, to be able to accomplish intra-municipal service sharing and consolidations before we look to have to, have mandated consolidations with our neighbors. There's stumbling blocks to intra-municipal consolidations and service sharing that should be eliminated, in my opinion. Pear Tree Beach redevelopment is moving forward. Ox Ridge Elementary School Building Committee will have their first meeting Monday at 5 p.m. Very exciting. Seth mentioned the public hearing on the banning of the plastic bags. That initiative is really meant for people to bring their own bags. And I hope that that doesn't get lost in the discussion. So everybody who believes in banning plastic bags, I hope that they're all carrying their own and using them at the grocery store. That'll be a very interesting public hearing. There's a lot of information on both sides of that issue. Regarding consolidations, it's not limited to tax sharing and it's not limited to the discussions on schools. They're also talking about, I believe, a representative has also put a bill in to rename the COGS counties. So a true return to county government. Heard that yesterday. And there's an effort to consolidate what's called our MPOs, municipal metropolitan planning organizations. And that's the part of the COG that manages state and federal transportation money, with the idea that they want to make those MPOs bigger to include New Haven, Bridgeport, and southwestern Connecticut, Stamford, so that the cities can benefit. There's a perceived idea that cities will have a bigger benefit, get a bigger piece of the transportation pie if we create these larger MPOs. So I think that that's something that's already being proposed. That's a federal law change, so I'm not sure the state can mandate that. I know they can't actually. So
That's so interesting, because that was the reason that the COGS were being pushed, was to capitalize on more federal transportation dollars.
correct. So
So
the best
there's
way,
another-
yeah,
Promise.
that's a conversation that we should have with our federal representatives
Right.
about transportation money, the
Because the
status of
first
transportation money.
Norwalk Hour, I think it was January 13th, had a headline, Connecticut is 48th in federal dollar. We're number one in dollars going, number one in the United States of funds going to Washington, bless you.
Thank you.
But 48th in funds coming back to Connecticut.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, two opposite ends of the spectrum.
So, an important thought on that, driven, I have to say, proudly by the executive director of WestCog, initiated this. we are seeking federal designation for the COGS to be viewed by the federal government as county equivalents, which means we stay COGS with all the same rules that we have as COGS, but there are precedents across the country where there are other government entities that have gotten this federal designation as a county because for federal grant, receiving of federal grants, there are certain monies that are only available to counties. So if we can have that designation, the governor just needs to sign a letter. Governor Malloy did not sign that letter. Governor Lamont needs to be briefed on the importance of that issue, and that would allow for all the COGS to apply for federal grant money that they're not otherwise eligible for at this point in time. We have actually created a 501c3 in WestCog so that we can receive grant monies. So, I have to give.
Jamie, do you think that's what's
Wait,
behind the renaming of the COG to counties, or is that Bill, you said representative, or is that they want a full county type government?
I think they want a full county type government because you can be you can have a federal redesignation without any kind of legal change. And I think a change to a county, if you change the COGS to counties, it really makes no sense because we already have counties. It's not a government, but I mean, what do you do with organizations like, for example, the Fairfield County Community Foundation and places like that have service areas that are, there would be a lot of reorganizing of predominantly not-for-profit service delivery, actually. So I don't know what the purpose of that is. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes in terms of the COGS. What I do see about the COGS, though, they're really nervous about their future. There was a proposal floated not only to consolidate MPOs, but to further consolidate the COGS this legislative session. And WestCog would have been proposed to join with the 3 surrounding COGS to make us a mega COG. It's just so bizarre. And that mega COG would have had a population of about 1.9 million people in it. So what I'm seeing happening is a competition between the COGS to, how can we be really great at some things so that we continue to be necessary. That's not a bad thing. And we have a regional service delivery committee in WestCog. We're always looking at ways that we can share amongst each other on a voluntary basis. That's awesome. We should be doing that. I think that those are all the things for me. We mentioned Old Town Hall homes. I think the equipment's on site to begin demolition. All the people have been relocated away from Old Town Hall homes. So lots going on, lots to keep our fingers on the pulse of. And thank you all. Does anybody we have some minutes that we can do quickly today? We have meeting minutes of November 14th first.
The only correction I have is under my report in December.
We're on November.
Okay, sorry.
Linda, I have a small one on November.
Sure.
I'm not sure it's the state's consultant. It's, I can get you the name of the organization.
Okay.
That's what Jamie referenced earlier today. So I will get you that and we can make that,
Okay,
with
great.
that correction.
Sure.
sometime.
Okay, if there are no further corrections, I'll entertain a motion to approve the November 14, 2018 minutes as amended.
Okay, I so moved.
Tara, second?
I'm not a voting member.
Okay.
Second.
I think Seth seconded, yeah.
Yeah,
All those in favor?
Very.
Aye. Okay, motion passes. Okay, the meeting minutes of December 20th.
So moved.
Any
Yeah, I
change?
do have but my report, she's optimistic about the upcoming session when the following items will be among the items addressed. A $15 minimum wage, tolls, non-medical marijuana, offline sports betting, and family leave. I'm not optimistic about those.
Oh, okay,
So I'm sure I said something about these are the controversial issues.
okay.
So
Were
I
you
would just like-
optimistic about the opening session, or the upcoming
Yeah,
session?
I think
Yeah,
we were
I
all-
am.
So
we're all
maybe it's two
optimistic
sentences.
about
Right,
Governor
it's two
Law.
sentences.
Okay,
I am
Take out
I am
when, have
genuinely
it stop.
optimistic about Ned,
Okay.
but those are controversial.
Okay.
Thank you. Clarity is good.
Great, okay, so we have a motion on the table, can I have a second? Okay, Tara, all those in favor? Aye, okay, motion carries. Quick public service announcement too, you mentioned non-medical marijuana. On April 24th at 7 p.m. here in Town Hall, parent awareness of the YWCA in partnership with the Darien Health Department and a few other community partners are having a presentation on marijuana. It isn't a pro or con whether we should or shouldn't vote for non-medical marijuana legality. It's really to provide facts. There will be an expert panel that will be there to give presentations and answer questions. So I think it's an important discussion. I hope everybody can come.
Right.
Okay. Is there anything else?
But thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Sure. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seth, may I have a second? Tara? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Great.